Well, nothing seems that ridiculous nowadays. So is an ACC Pac-12 merger one day? Not now necessarily, but one day? Is it that ridiculous? I don't think so.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights-free and beloved Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, please and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege. When you enter the promo code LockedOnCollege, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. And I'm thrilled to be joined today on the show by Candace Cooper, the host of Locked On ACC. We're talking about the Atlantic Coastal Conference. And Candace, you and I were talking before we came on to record the show. If Liv and the PGA Tour can get together and merge, heck, one day in a foreseeable, semi-realistic world, an ACC Pac-12 merger of some sorts is not the most ridiculous thing on planet Earth anymore, is it?
It absolutely is not. Spencer, thanks so much for having me. But more than that, will our conferences survive all of this big talk? I feel like everyone is just kicking us to the side at this point. Like we're not, Conference of Champions over here. We have some pretty good things going on in the ACC, and yet it's just I feel like we're bottom of the barrel, and we're just not.
Yeah, I know, and it's. It's just kind of the way that the conference realignment discussion is going. It's just like Big Ten, SEC, Big Ten, SEC, and then it's kind of the other three. I do have to ask you as well, Candace, is it nice to be in a conference that has a media rights deal? Is that comforting?
If my deal wasn't so, how do I put this? I mean, we are just locked in. We are tied together, blood, sweat, and tears. I think they signed it in blood, honestly, John Swafford. But, just it is reassuring to know that, some of our teams, we're locked down. I know you're trying to have all these reemergents trying to, shy away and get away from us, but you're here. You're tied to us. The bond is great. So I would say that's nice, but it's a little stressful when it's the constant complaining, which it seems to be as of late.
Well, I mean, that's all that, anybody does in the world now. It's like, yeah, this isn't good enough. We gotta make it better. We can't just appreciate what we've got. We can't just keep college football status quo as is. Fundamentally, we have to alter the ground underneath our feet and such. But let that be a lesson for all you Pac-12 fans out there who really want a media deal. Sometimes, if the deal's no good, you're just going to end up wanting out of it anyway. So that there's the upside to it. That's as positive of a spin as I can put on the situation right now. But I want to get into what the details could look like of an ACC Pac-12 merger, partnership. I don't find it out of the realm of possibility, but the biggest thing that comes to mind, Candace, I think are two things. Number one, the volume of teams that you would have, and I have an idea about that some particular fans might not enjoy that I'll get to later. But the second one is the logistics of it. And my understanding at this point from the Pac-12 side has been that's kind of a holdup there. And we've seen presidents and athletic directors still continue to talk about that stuff and say, yeah, logistics are going to be tough for USC and UCLA in the Big Ten. Is that a hurdle that you feel could be overcome if this were to come to fruition?
I think it could be something that people could get past, but I just don't see it being a possibility. You think about North Carolina having to go play someone in Washington and just the adjustments, the tangible real life, we are on different coasts adjustments, and also trying to get quality play out of your players, timing, all the things. I think it's just not worth the effort. Beyond that, traveling, we know to go to California for me here on the East Coast is going to cost me $700 versus me going down the street where I could potentially take a bus. Like there's no bus option, which I think is something that, you certainly consider when trying to merge teams and trying to get commercial flights and charter planes for football programs. It's just a lot having to feed all those people and make sure these are you take the reason why the NBA, NFL take trips and they stay out a little bit longer during their West Coast visits or all of the things because because they know tangibly it's a little more expensive if you got to go play the Sacramento Kings and then the Los Angeles Lakers. If you're, a team like the Chicago Bulls, like you got to make it work for you. So I think it's like logistics will always be the hurdle. I don't know that you get past it from a college lens, especially when a lot of these schools are state schools.
And the other thing too is whatever, and this goes for any realignment conversation that you're going to have. If you're talking about, making a geographical change, that has to be a factor there, right? Like USC and UCLA are going to be spending much more on travel because there are more than two sports in a university athletics department.
Crazy, yeah.
It's easy to forget that, but football and men's basketball are not the only sports that exist.
Yeah.
They are the ones that are bringing in the lion's share of the money for these departments and whatnot, but expenses exist elsewhere. So, I've talked about that in the context of, schools potentially going to the Big 12, is if your travel is $3 million more expensive, suddenly a $5 million bump in the media rights, money that gets kicked back to you from the conference isn't quite as appealing because it's like, well, really, that's $2 million. Okay, but that $2 million doesn't actually go just to the football. That's going to the athletic department.
Right.
So you're talking about kind of a minuscule amount in that sense. But the idea that popped into my head, and this is not one I'm advocating for. I'm just saying like it's a theory given, something we're going to talk about later as well, the whole Magnificent Seven thing and the big schools, the big brands breaking off is, do you think it would be more tenable for these schools? There would be legal hurdles, obviously, as the ACC, and I'm sure you've talked about on your show quite a bit over the last couple of months. But what about that concept of just the big brands, the big schools kind of breaking off and going to do you think that would make it more appealing for these conferences to really, really work together one day and try to, merge, form their own league or something crazy like that?
I definitely think that it would be more appealing. It's certainly more sexy when you talk about the big brands, you talk about the revenue sports, of course, but as you mentioned, the non-revenue sports and a lot of programs here in the ACC, some of the best things they have going for them is their non-revenue sports. And so it's hard to convince, a NC State tennis team that they need to go out and play a Washington tennis team just because, and things like that, of that nature. But beyond that, I really feel as if, the ACC is in a position where they have but so many big name brands that could carry weight right now from how they're doing from a actual tangible W's and L's standpoint. Like we're not rolling in the championships right now. So I'm not trying to say, like, I'm not saying we can't bring it back to surface, but we don't have the right leverage in order for that big brand positioning. Like our Miami team is still holding on to the 90s, right? Our FSU team, they haven't won since Jameis Winston. So it'd be interesting to see if people actually want us. Like I get it. In theory, sure, but can they actually bring them some positivity beyond just a little bit of fandom?
Yeah, and I think there is an appeal. I'm sure there are power brokers in college sports and athletics that would look at the prospect of a conference that features Clemson, Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, Duke, Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Cal, maybe Utah or somebody like that, and just kind of consolidate like that. It would be very much in step with what is just happening in the world of sports, which is if you're not being aggressive, then you're going to be on the defensive, and soon you're going to be looking at possible extinction maybe, or just ceasing to exist because you don't keep up and stay competitive with those times. But we've got more questions to answer with that, and I want to ask you about the so-called Magnificent Seven as well, and kind of what went down there. Not sure how many Pac-12 fans are aware of all that sort of stuff. Also not sure how many of you are aware that Birddog shorts are fantastic. They make you look good. They make you feel good. They're super stretchy. They're super comfortable. They're easy. Their versatility is maybe their best quality. You can wear them on the golf course, wear them on a hike, riding bikes, walking, jogging, something in between walking and jogging. If that's kind of your vibe, you can wear them swimming, whatever you want. Birddog stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and the leg by giving you a truly sculpted look. Birddog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit way better, and they are super crazy comfortable. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of a stiff, restricting cotton. Birddogs uses anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. Go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. Enter promo code lockedoncollege for a free Yeti-style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege for a free Yeti-style tumbler. You won't want to take off your bird dogs all summer long. We promise you they are that comfortable. All right. That's what we call the second segment sip, to make sure my voice and my mouth don't give out as we as we do the show. But on a potential merger idea, this all stems from a question sent in by Eric, by the way. Don't have to read the whole thing, but if you ever want to be a part of the mailbag, you all know YouTube comments, or hit me up on Twitter at Smalls_55 or at LO_Pac12. The legality of schools breaking off make it pretty unlikely, right? And we kind of learned that with the Magnificent Seven, which we'll touch on here in a moment. But a full conference merger, Candace, one day, I'm not saying that this could be imminent, but we're thinking everything goes right now, because that's kind of the way the world feels. Like anything and everything goes, bend the rules, push the boundaries, all that sort of stuff. You have 10 teams currently in the Pac-12. You might have 12 soon. You have 16 or 14, right, in the ACC. A 24-team conference. I mean, schedule-wise, branding, matchups, depth of quality teams, it to me, it seems like it would be a fun idea, and certainly it would be a competitive conference that would ensure that they would stay relevant going forward. It's just a matter of, can you do that for the very first time? Because we have not seen conference-wide mergers before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like, at the end of the day, when you, in theory, it's all fun, right? We talk about all of these scenarios and anything can happen, but, you know, we do get back to the legalities of it. And ACC, it really has no leverage to try and dance with anybody, because our grant of rights deal is till 2036. We definitely have, there's penalties, 9-figure penalties, if you decide that you want to even dibble dabble. If the lawyers couldn't figure it out by now, you know, I think there's no figuring it out necessarily. Beyond that, even when you do leave, let's say, for instance, you find 120 million, you got to still have your home games given to ESPN. So it's not exactly the sexiest, like, let's find an out. And for Pac-12, and you want to have those certain games, and let's say they have a blackout game or things of that nature, it kind of just loses its effect. So I'm really hoping that the ACC kind of just sticks beside itself. You know, they don't really try and make that dance, or don't try to bring anybody in. But as Commissioner Phillips always says, there's always conversations happening. So you never know with this bad boy. But I would really argue that it's good in theory, it's good to dream, but it's just not feasible.
Yeah, I think the feasibility of it is, you know, sketchy at best. I also thought a Live PGA Tour merger was impossible, would never happen, we'd never see it, and here we are, and that's why we're talking about this on today's show. Because,
fair point.
I mean, I think you could have some really fun matchups, most notably Oregon and Miami, of course, because of the Mario Cristobal factor. But I mean, absolutely, just from a brand standpoint, right? Like, you have a sufficient number of brand, like, let's say hypothetically we are incorrect in our assessment, and the grant of rights ends, or the ACC as we know it comes down, and then they merge with the remaining Pac-10 teams, and they form a 24-team super conference. There is no world in which there aren't enough brands to be highly competitive, highly relevant, highly valuable, and in terms of how the details would get worked out from the television side, that would be for network executives and for commissioners to kind of look into on that front, and they have to figure that sort of stuff out. I'm glad it's not me, because it'd be wildly complicated. But yeah, if you're talking about a power move that both conferences can make, Candace, I don't think there's another one on either side. The Pac-12 is still looking for a media rights deal. The most likely additions are San Diego State and SMU, who I like the prospect of adding them, but that's not a power move. It's a survival move. Yeah. And the ACC is, trying to stop schools from wanting to go to the Big Ten or the SEC. And there aren't any other power moves that I could foresee, given that the Big 12 has already secured its future. I mean, maybe when their media rights deal comes up, the Big 12s, you try to go after their biggest schools, maybe. But I don't think either conference has any other power moves, aggressive plays really on the table.
Well, I also think the problem is that for a lot of the ACC schools, they're a package deal. Like North Carolina and North Carolina State, you got to figure out 1 and 2 from a from North Carolina law, you cannot have one without the other. For Virginia and Virginia Tech, you cannot have one without the other. And so that's when we were talking about Magnificent Seven. Those were included, and you're kind of head scratching like NC State. Why would you, figure like you have any chess moves in this bad boy? So curious if Pac-12 has any of those type of deals with their respective state schools like Oregon State, things like that. Because for me, I'm telling the ACC, you're not playing with the right set of cards because you're having to drag behind a couple of those who you would love to just leave behind.
Yeah, and I know that there are some laws that have been written on that sort of stuff. I think there's actually a tie between Oregon and Washington as universities. I'd have to double check all that sort of stuff, but it wouldn't surprise me at all because again, it's really easy to get lost in the weeds in these talks and think about it just as athletic departments, football teams, and basketball teams. It's like these are universities. A lot of them are publicly funded, meaning they are tied to the state government and they are subject to the laws and regulations hereby written by the state legislature there. And they don't have, unlimited free will, which is a perfect segue into the Magnificent Seven situation. So for Pac-12 fans who are not aware of kind of what went down but then didn't go down there, Candace, just kind of give a summary there of what exactly was happening, what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Big Ten, Pac-12, ACC alliance that kind of went down but never really went down. So the ACC had the Magnificent Seven, where there were 7 schools during ACC spring meetings that were flirting with the idea of seceding, like, good old South, seceding from the league, right? So they were telling us that they were up to here. They just needed an 8th team in order to fully become its own league and separate from the ACC completely. So a lot of people were feeling like Commissioner Phillips was up against the wall, pleading with these schools not to go away. It was Florida State, Clemson, and Miami. Then you had North Carolina State, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. And Louisville magically was the 8th team that people said was going to come in and really secede.
Not Duke.
And so surprise of it is, I don't know if you know about AAU schools. We talked about it on my show yesterday, but Duke, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, Miami, Notre Dame, like those are some of the schools that are part of the AAU. And you have to be a part of the AAU in order to be in the Big Ten. And so that started to bring around the dance of like, okay, but who could really leave? Pitt is another team a part of the AAU. Could they be the ones that, shut everything down, right? And become the one that we didn't see coming and surprise all of us and decide that they want to go to the Big Ten. Kind of makes sense for where they are regionally. But the Magnificent Seven were just a group of ADs frustrated by what's going on. I think in the world of pay transparency, seeing what's in front of them between the SEC and the Big Ten, how far behind they're going to be in the coming years, and they had just really had enough. Now, by the end of the spring meetings, they really just silenced themselves. You didn't hear anything about it. They came out of the meeting saying, we're good, we're happy, all the things that let you know, based on any coach you've ever watched, any, professional politician or anything, that something definitely is afoot. Like something is certainly on the horizon. And I think it's going to be led by, FSU and Clemson, if I would be to guess the 2 schools. But the Magnificent Seven blew a lot of hot smoke, but then ultimately it fizzled away.
So was the determination at the end of that those schools did want to either leave to a bigger conference, the SEC or the Big Ten, or break off the ACC as we know it, then establish their own league to kind of give themselves unequal revenue sharing, which happened, by the way, in the Pac-12 in, it was sometime in like the mid 20th century, but a couple of schools unhappy about the revenue sharing component broke off and said, okay, we're disbanding this league, we're going to go form our own, then we're going to invite back the schools that we just left behind because we actually just wanted to get a bigger percentage of the money. But at the end of the day, now it did happen way back in the 50s or something like that, but the ACC schools kind of ran into a brick, probably legal wall on that front. But they were, it sounds like they just needed an 8th school, and they could have just completely torpedoed the ACC, broken off, and formed their own conference.
100% there. It was the latter. I think that what really stopped them was when you really break down the ESPN deal and the fact that there are still a lot of hurdles in terms of what you're actually getting. Like if you take it away, there's no more grant of rights. You still owe the ESPN a lot of your games. And so that made it also less sexy. And I also think there was a team that really just couldn't commit. Even though there was rumors again that it was Louisville, you never really saw that in full, conversations. However, I do think, Commissioner Phillips finally acknowledged the gap. Like before, he had kept trying to dress it up as, oh, well, we'll just grab a Washington. We'll just, tell Notre Dame that we'll finally get together and figure things out. And so I think having him be a little more transparent about understanding that there are needs that need to be met, and maybe having negotiations with ESPN, which I don't see that happening because ESPN has the upper hand. Why would they want to negotiate something that's already in their favor? But I think it was more about the transparency and acknowledgement and figuring out maybe there needs to be a different distribution deal at the end of the day.
Yeah, the ESPN factor. I understand the schools who are saying, hey, we want to go and re-up our deal. Because if the ACC were on the market, they would be able to get, I think, probably more, given where they're located, the markets that they're in, brands that they have, than an average or a running average of about $36 million per school per year. I think they could probably eclipse the 40, maybe even the 50 number. I'm not a media executive, but that contract was just negotiated so long ago, and it's locked in for so long that the valuation of sports has just gone up immensely since then. And that was another part of the reason as to why they wanted to kind of get out of there. And look, if they had done that, or if they decide, in a couple of years, hey, we have 7, we actually have an 8th on board, and we want to, break off from the ACC here, I wonder what sort of state the Pac-12 would be in to try and, I don't know that they would have a high leverage situation, but if there were opportunities, you could have individual schools who might look at it and say, hey, are you guys forming a league over there? That looks pretty cool. If you're trying to go for this, like, hey, we're Oregon, we're Washington, we're Stanford and Cal. Like, you want us, you want to include us too, right?
Yeah.
Like, that feels like a domino that has stayed upright for now, but doesn't feel like it's impossible to think of a world in which it kind of comes back.
Yeah, I really feel like there's a world where there's probably going to be 2 leagues or something that emulates one huge league, kind of like the NFL, an amateur version of the NFL, because the way NIL is going, the way just teams and, conferences are separating, it feels less and less like the old traditional, like we want to make sure we play the certain teams every year. We have these historic rivalries, and more about like who can get us the biggest money to get us to the college football playoff, to get us a national championship game. And so even with the college football playoff expanding to 12 teams, right? It's just not as sexy as it was to have those Final Four, figure out who's going to, duke it out and which conference is going to be able to pull from. And so I really envision a world where we're just going to do away with all of this talk, hoopla, and, we're probably just going to give big FU to the NCAA and try to find our own thing.
And that timeline, I think, is more drawn out than some people might think. Everything feels very urgent and quick and fast moving right now, but these deals have been signed. Yeah. So when you talk about, a 2-conference world, I think that is 100% possible in the future. But when I say future, I'm saying like 10 years from now, right. 15, 20, in my lifetime, yes, but not in the near distant future. Last thing I want to talk about today, Candace, is where do these 2 conferences that for different reasons are not in positions of leverage, despite having a bunch of great teams and great fans and great products to put on television, on the field and whatnot. The ACC is too locked into that deal, and ESPN's not going to renegotiate because they know, looking at the other deals, we have them on the cheap right now, and we're not going to try and do that because that would not make sense from a business standpoint. Pac-12 doesn't even have a deal right now, and us, along with the Big 12, we all kind of feel like we're in defensive mode, just dreading the day where the SEC or the Big Ten decides, we want to just go and get your biggest brands and pull them over here and whatnot. So if you're the ACC and or the Pac-12, do you try and work together to make your conferences as appealing as possible, matchups, scheduling, that sort of thing, to give yourself big games, get TV ratings, draw interest, intrigue, legitimacy, all that sort of stuff? Like, what do you do from here if you're these 2 leagues?
Yeah, listen, I think that ultimately, like, it comes down to the X's and O's, right? Especially for your major revenue sports. I think they still have to remain in the conversation and excel and achieve at highest of levels. So you have to me, go into that recruiting space, that NIL space, really make sure all of your schools are fine tuned with making sure they can offer, these young people who are very much money driven these days, the finest deals, and ensure that they are coming to your schools and they're going to excel and do all of the things that are sexy. Like, it's hard to make sexy a school that you don't know what TV channel they're going to be on, right? It's hard to make sexy a program where you're like, are we going to be an ACC here in the next 5 years? Who knows? Like, it's hard to sell that right now, but I certainly think that, achievement on the field is going to be their biggest way. Recruiting is going to be another, but you also give the matchups of maybe a Miami and Oregon, or you have a home and home. Like, you try and dress up your schedules to be a little more appealing for those who like want to have that on the calendar and maybe attend. And they bring out crowds. We know that certain Pac-12 schools definitely draw a crowd. We know that certain ACC schools are going to sell up, good or bad or indifferent. So I think that's just going to be one of the really important parts.
Yeah, I think that if a merger, as we discussed, is unlikely, though not impossible, I just think, a scheduling alliance on that front. And look, I know we had one with the Big Ten, and then they went back and really, really screwed the Pac-12 in a big way. I get that. Yeah. But now for the Pac-12 and the ACC, I don't think either conference is in a position where they can, just completely submarine torpedo the other league the way that the Big Ten did. And I think creating those sorts of matchups, particularly in college football, of course, would be really, really good. To have Oregon play Miami, to have Washington play, a North Carolina or something, like match up your biggest television draws. I don't see who loses in that outcome. College football fans certainly win across the board. And I think that it can be a tough sell to the schools sometimes, but in the 12-team playoff era, I think you could be, more inclined to see schools willing to schedule tough games because it can help them, but a loss doesn't take them out of the conversation entirely the way that it does now. You'll be able to get in the playoff with 2 or maybe even 3 losses. So I think an ACC Pac-12 alliance, whatever you want to call it, going forward, I think it'd be really, really fun.
Yeah, I also think you have opportunities, especially from the basketball lens. You have these Nike Classics, your
great point.
Different type of classics that they're all trying to dance up these days. And so you certainly could try and bring some of these schools that, have the same sponsorships together and figure out ways to draw crowds and put them in neutral sites and have that bad boy, showing that they can bring out the crowd, they can bring out the fandom and all, and bring out the revenue is certainly something, to split and be like, oh, this has worked out well. See how the logistics came out to be good. So let's figure, maybe we can figure this out for both men's and women's basketball. That also brings out a crowd, and you're trying to, gain leverage in that standpoint. So there's a lot of good brand positioning opportunities for sure.
Well, the ACC may have things in the last 10 years like national championships in the 2 major sports and a media deal that the Pac-12 doesn't, but we're not so different after all at the end of the day. Candace Cooper is at Candace D. Cooper on Twitter, host of Locked On ACC, Monday through Friday on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Candace, great to chat.
Spencer, thank you for having me.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.